In this video, I'm going to go over some further thoughts on a few aspects regarding Ruine. The last video was more so to get the word out there for this game, but this one's going to be more so discussing the gameplay and mechanics, as well as a bit about the world and characters, giving feedback for the developer and all that jazz. Because of this though, I'd recommend you watch the first video, otherwise some things might not make sense in this video. I think I've done pretty much everything I can when it comes to Ruine. I've experimented with different builds, conquered each ruin, crafted all the items I can, and collected more or less all the relics currently in the game. As far as I'm concerned, this pretty much means completion for this version of the game, though I have built up a good understanding of the game and where its strengths and weaknesses lie in terms of a player experience. With that said, this is still a bare bones game, so I probably won't be talking about much, or I may be milking one topic for a bit too long, but hey, what can you do? I suppose the best way to start would be to go over what you'll be doing throughout the majority of the game, and that's the combat. Combat is very simple, but effective in this game. You attack with whatever weapon you have equipped and utilize whatever technique it allows, whether it be charging, parrying, or cleaving. Charging will allow you to charge up your attack, causing additional damage and better helping you time your attack. Parrying will allow you to parry any damaging move that's coming your way and leave an opening on your opponent, even if you parry a move that doesn't make much sense to parry. Cleaving will simply allow you to hit any enemy you have in your range, rather than just one. Other combat abilities involve a neat dodge move to avoid attacks, and essential for repositioning yourself in the heat of combat, and magic spells which vary in their uses, depending on which spells you have equipped and what build you go for. The combat and abilities are only complemented further by the foes you'll be facing. Skeletons act as your basic troop, attacking while repositioning themselves to keep you on your toes. Slimes behave as a fast and annoying pest that, more often than not, leap out of your attack range. These fleshy, stompy boys behave as a pressure unit that gradually wall you in while tanking all your hits, and a few others with attack patterns you'll have to learn to ensure you don't take too much damage. If I had to pick a favourite enemy, it would have to be the ranged skeleton. Not just because they limp in the most adorable way possible, but their projectile is a right nuisance in the best possible way. The projectile they throw has to be dodged by either crouching or dashing through it. You can even parry it with your weapon if it has the ability to. So, everything seems to be on the right track, and what we have right now is a very basic, if not solid start to a potentially gratifying combat system. Still, there are a few aspects of the combat that are being held back that really don't have to be. I don't think I like the fact that some of the weapon techniques, such as charging, parrying, and cleaving, are unique to very specific weapons. Now, you could pass it off as just one more thing to consider when having to choose between more than one weapon to take with you to a ruin, but I never saw it as that. Simply being able to charge and parry a weapon adds so much to the combat that I feel like if the later added areas are only going to get harder, that it'll need to become essential to have these two abilities. Maybe not so much cleaving, but the other two, totally. Now, I know, it's possible to beat the whole game right now with a stick that does not have any of these abilities, which is a testament to how versatile the combat itself is. I'm aware of that. But we can only assume that the game is going to demand more from us as it goes further and further into development. Let's be honest though, even if it doesn't, it would still probably be better if, at least, parrying was integrated into our combat abilities as default. Oh, so all weapons in the game should be able to parry? Well, not necessarily. It probably wouldn't make sense trying to parry with a magic wand. Look, I guess what I'm trying to say is that I'm more of a fan of using what abilities you have to overcome an obstacle, rather than having a load of optional abilities where each one is just as effective as the other. And look, I know, that's not to say there aren't other aspects such as damage numbers, armor rating, and leveling up that change the dynamic of combat in Ruin. I know that much. Right, there's quite a bit to go over, so I'll try and explain what the main issue is, and what I would do to fix it if I were developing the game. I'm not, but this is what I would do if I was. Right, so, even if the weapon you carry has all these combat abilities, there is very little incentive to use them. Just simply walking back and forth from a group of enemies outside their range is enough to net you success, and having a long-ranged weapon only makes it even easier to do that. There's a weapon in the game you can acquire from this merchant right here, if you have 300 gold to buy it, which is not that hard to get, and have the skill points required to hold it. That's you. You've won the game. And all that's if you don't just randomly find it in a chest, which can absolutely happen. You have an overpowered weapon with massive damage, huge range, all techniques, and some chance-based status effects. Now, admittedly, working towards this weapon and then finally acquiring it is definitely gratifying. There is fun in working to acquire it and using it to tear the hordes of skeletons and stompy boys for a while. Not forever, however. I felt no incentive to use this weapon's abilities, and this is where the problem lies. Even though the game has a rather decent selection of different weapons, abilities, build variety, and magic spells, each one is more or less as good as any other. Despite what you might believe, this doesn't open up options for you. It just makes you rely on the one weapon that gives you the quickest result, and in my case, that'll be walking back and forth in front of an enemy while clicking vigorously until they fall, with the odd dash here and there. Is there anything wrong with this? Absolutely not. Let's make one thing clear, just because this isn't my preferred method of dealing with enemies, doesn't mean that the combat, as it is right now, is in any way dysfunctional or badly designed. Quite the contrary, I think the combat itself is wonderfully designed. It's just being held back by several things I feel like it doesn't have to be. So we have the problem. What's the solution then? The solution? Further incentivize using your abilities. How? Enemy design. Allow me to explain. I previously mentioned the ranged skeleton on how you're encouraged to pay attention to its attack, lest you're going to take damage you could have avoided. Simply running towards it and bashing it with your overpowered ice sword isn't enough. You have to either dodge or parry its attack to get close enough, and that's easier said than done when there's numbers of different enemies in front of it. On a related note, the small slime enemy requires you to crouch to get a reliable hit on it. When you crouch, you can't move, so you have to sacrifice your movement in order for you to take out this annoying pest. Now, on their own, these two enemies are no problem, but combining them with other enemies really forces you to consider your positioning and prioritization in the heat of battle. They can really screw off your groove if you're not paying attention, and it's frustrating in the best possible way when that happens. The second area in the game just shows you how demanding these combinations of enemies can get. And I don't mean all this in a negative sense. I like the fact that you're forced to consider every encounter you face and overcome it, even if it can be frustrating at times. These enemies exist to teach you and become accustomed to the mechanics of the combat and make you a better player for it. I love this kind of stuff in video games. If future enemies are added, I hope they take advantage of what combat abilities and game mechanics there is. I imagine an enemy who is resistant to certain weapon types, like a rock monster or something, resistant to everything except for maces. Or an enemy that is impossible to damage until you successfully parry their attack. Of course that would require the parry ability to be on you by default. In that case, you might also need more than one weapon type in your inventory to be able to use. Some form of weapon switching may help with that. You know, I'll leave it there for now. I hope this illustrates my point well enough. Look, Ruin's combat is very solid and has the opportunity to be something that can make this game stand out from the rest if it's done right. The combat is on the right track for having skill-based mechanics, but there's a lack of incentive or requirement to even use the abilities you have because of the simplistic enemies and scale-based balance. And look, I'm not saying the game shouldn't have skill-based balance. That can still be there alongside the skill-based combat. Look, there's 100 different directions the game can take in terms of combat and balance. I'm just a fan discussing what I think is the best way forward. Even then, if it doesn't change, if Ruin doesn't go the direction of skill-based combat and wants to instead stick with the balance it's established and place its focus on completely different aspects of the game, like story or level design, I'm totally fine with that, because the combat works as it is right now. And that goes for everything I'm about to discuss. Need we forget that this is a one-man project, and I don't envy the developer in having to balance an entire video game. I've gone on long enough, so I'll just conclude this point and talk about something else. As good as the combat and enemy variety is right now, the game could still do with a bit more enemy types to fight, if, for whatever reason, to at least save people from getting bored fighting the same enemy type over and over. But I'm confident we'll see more in future updates. All I hope is that whatever new enemy gets added will stick with the philosophy of having each enemy be a single piece in a combat puzzle, which, from my experience, can be one of the most gratifying things to overcome in any video game. Period. If you were to point a gun to my head and ask me what Ruin's biggest strength right now is, it would be the combat. Yes, like everything in this game right now, it's very bare bones, and I think could do with a few changes, but it is definitely heading in the right direction. Anyway, that was what I thought about the combat. What was I only took about just under 6 pages worth of a document? What's next? I mentioned some other gameplay mechanics in the last video, so I suppose I'll go over them in a little more detail. We have the building mode, a mode where you can place down chests and store whatever you want to keep inside them. It's the only way to do that, so it's basically essential right now if you want to keep whatever you find. There's really not a lot to go over with this. It's a simple feature that simply works exactly how you would expect it to. I will say it's strange that you can't place a furnace wherever you want, despite there being one you can gradually build at the beginning, but that's hardly a real issue at this point. If I have to nitpick, I suppose the storage space the chest offers isn't particularly enough for the amount of items you'll eventually be getting, especially if you're hoarding everything like I do. So you end up having a large stretch of chests expanding all the way out to areas enemies start showing up. So you get wolves and slimes attacking you, to which you'll have to fight back and risk accidentally destroying some of your chests. At worst, it's just an inconvenience. The only way I could picture fixing this is to maybe have areas specifically designed to hunt specific creatures so they don't bother you near the campfire, or give you some sort of base you could chill at without having any enemies interrupting you. For the latter, I could picture a run-down chapel keeping up with the spooky Eldritch tone of the game. But that's just me. As far as the building mechanic goes, that's about it. I'd love to see more things to be able to build, and have the whole thing expanded in some way that surprises us. What direction it's going to take, though, is up to the developer. Oh, and for the record, I said in the last video that you can place down chests in ruins. It turns out you can't, like, at all. I thought I did once and just assumed you always could, so I'd never bothered to fact check it for myself. So, apologies, that one's on me. Alongside the building mode, we have the crafting mode, which is a different thing, I promise. With a press of the G button, you'll open up a window of not 35, but 25 items you can craft. If you have the required items to craft what you want to craft, you can then craft the craftable item with those items. Recurring joke. This is as basic as a crafting mode can get, and there's not really much more I can think to add to it. All I'll say is that, personally, I love seeing an overpowered item at the beginning of the game and working towards being able to craft it and acquire it. I hope more items like this can be added. I find it's a great incentive to continuously play and experiment with a game. Might be cool if there was some progression tree to the crafting mode, where as you create one item, more items become open to you and will gradually get better the more you make. That's just one idea, though. However, if that's not the direction the developer wants to go with the crafting, that's fine too. Well, that about does it for the crafting. And the building, for that matter. Yeah, there's not a lot I wish I had more to say, but I'm confident these two mechanics are going to get expanded in some way, given a further purpose or drastically changed in the coming future. Story and characters next. There's not a lot. A shock, I know. I can't really comment on the story or even what your main character's deal really is because there's simply nothing here as of right now. I will say though that what I do like is the character design and somewhat foreshadowing nature of the dialogue. All the friendly NPCs you meet act as merchants and each have their own dialogue to listen to. Or look at. The exchange between each one is quite fun to see, for the first time at least. They don't have much to say after you speak to them outside of a small Easter egg. They all seem quite content in this horrible world. What with all the monsters and undead creatures lurking around the place, seems like a depressing place to be, which makes these more often than not upbeat characters seem like they're making the most out of what they have, which is quite interesting. If the story of this game is going to be left vague, it might be cool having the NPCs gradually open up about themselves and the world they inhabit with different pieces of dialogue as you level up. It's just an idea though. I'm sure there's a plan to be had with these characters for the future, as I do many things in this game. Speaking of characters, I'm the most intrigued by the main character you play as. At the beginning of the game, you select his name and appearance through a decent selection of hair and manly beard styles, though you don't influence his actions or dialogue as you play the game. The fact that you're customizing your appearance instead of your character in general suggests that this will be more character driven than your typical RPG. The dialogue with different NPCs are interesting in the sense that you don't choose what you say, you simply watch how your character reacts to whatever strange creature he speaks to, which I'm all down for if that's the direction it's going to take. I can only theorize why he's acting this way. Revenge? Does he hate demons or something? Is he a priest? I can only hope he gets fleshed out more in the future and isn't left up to whatever the player wants him to be. Even if it is revealed gradually over time what he's trying to do, I'd like to know. I like the no-nonsense approach the main character takes towards everything, and at times, NPCs speak to him in what sounds like foreshadowing phrases. It should probably give you an idea of what the story of this game would eventually be if it decides to develop that aspect further. I really hope it does. I'm desperate, so desperate, to know more about the world this game has created, whether it means showing off more unique characters or travelling to more unique locations. Okay, so transition over to talking about level design and locations. Let's talk about level... Nailed it. As for location, I have no idea where this game is set or what happened to it. Though judging by the background, I can't imagine it was anything good. The description on Steam says that it's a Souls-like fantasy setting, so since I don't play any Souls-like games or know anything about their lore, I can't really set my mind on anything. Hey, do Souls-like games have a stream of water next to you at all times, everywhere you go? Because this game does. For the record, I don't mind that the setting of this game isn't clear right now. You think that'd be something to deal with later on in development, after you get all the gameplay stuff sorted out. Plus, it's not totally clear if the story is even relevant or connected to the rest of the game. All I can say is that I'd like to know more about the setting and what the heck is going on. Otherwise, I'm quite happy just abolishing demonic creatures in my video game. I really like these sorts of games for some reason. We have two main areas in this version of the game. There's a beginning area, which houses the Forgotten Tunnelways, and the second area you unlock after completing the first area is the Corrupted Orchard. Level design in both these areas is lacking, if I'm being honest. If you like walking left and right, then this is the game for you. There's no platforming of any kind in this game right now. This is a very grounded experience, as it stands, definitely fit for a honed-in combat experience, but not so much exploration. I don't know about you, but when I hear the word ruin, I picture ran-down, creature-infested ancient monuments with a past long forgotten and secrets still to be uncovered, not to mention dangerous to traverse through with many unexpected surprises. You know, think of Indiana Jones and the temples he goes through. That's not to say Ruin doesn't have a couple of these aspects, but for the most part, I can't say I picture long, uneventful, dark tunnelways only connected through stairways. Okay, that's a bit unfair to say, all things considering, but my point remains that everything regarding dungeons and their design is somewhat mediocre. Decoratively, there's almost nothing, making each room feel very samey with little way to distinguish them from one another, except for a few examples at the beginning of the first ruin, and at the end of the same ruin for that matter. Now, I'm aware that what's in this game right now doesn't warrant stuff like traversal puzzles, deep exploration, or aesthetic improvements, but I think this game could really do with some glamour that really makes you feel like Spider-Man. No, that really makes you feel like you're uncovering the forbidden treasures and secrets of a 1,000-year-old ruin. It really makes you feel like Ruin. They could do with being longer as well, though judging by the corrupted orchard, that'll happen with later added areas. One thing I do like is the fact that the ruins aren't randomly generated. Now, I don't know about you, but I much prefer handcrafted, tailored, properly paced experiences rather than auto-generated levels in hopes that everything will come together properly. Nothing against RNG outcomes. There are several games I like a lot that do random generation well, but Ruin really doesn't need something like that. I believe Ruin has enough on its plate to stand on its own mechanics without a trendy gimmick such as that. I wouldn't mind auto-generated dungeons in a separate mode, say some form of endless mode, that might be fun. But if we're talking the main game, I much prefer learning the placements of chests, enemies, the layout of the dungeon, how to deal with them, that sort of stuff. This isn't to say Ruin doesn't have its own form of randomness, what with the scale of enemies, the loot you'll be finding, and the chest mimics that show up every now and again. But these are fine. I'm more talking about the fundamental experience affected by randomness. Look. Okay, look. There's lots of games out there that rely on randomness to either give you an enjoyable time or a terrible time, depending on how lucky you are. This was a trend that was happening with video games ever since, I would say, Minecraft came out. Games suddenly relied on algorithms and randomly generated situations to build their games to extend their lifespan. The last couple of years, it's felt like we've been getting out of this trend gradually, which, thank goodness. That's not to say these sorts of experiences don't have their place, but it makes games feel eerily similar to one another, despite its genre. Not to mention that skill-based games, which are ones I much prefer, the past few years have been feeling more and more like an afterthought. Look, when I started playing Ruin, I never even bothered with the abilities the weapons offer. The only thing I really cared about was cleave, because more hits means more damage. But later, as I experimented with parrying and charging, I found there was so much more fun to be had because these abilities were so good despite how simple they are. Combining these abilities with movement and dashing suddenly made my gameplay faster and encouraged me to put my skill points into something other than just strength. Agility would make me move faster and dodge attacks more reliably, and Constitution would encourage me to play more recklessly from the additional health. Intelligence would allow me to use magic spells more often to open up more combat opportunities. These were the most memorable moments for me when playing Ruin, and none of it was randomly generated at all. These moments were all what the game had to offer in its mechanics, and that's what I'm trying to get at here. Ruin's got a ton of opportunities ahead of itself, and who's telling how different the game will be in the coming months? Though right now there's lots of aspects that have a very similar feeling to lots of other games I've played. Look, the Minecraft quip I made on the last video wasn't just for a joke. As funny as that may have been, there was a further meaning behind it. Things like the crafting, building, looting, and stuff like that aren't exactly the most inspired mechanics out there, and just feel like a watered-down version of several other games with similar mechanics. The more Ruin can rely on its own mechanics and design, and can further differentiate itself from the crowd of hundreds of other indie games, the healthier it'll be for the game, if you ask me. On the other side of the coin, relics in this game are awesome. Now, I mentioned relics in the last video but didn't actually go over them, so I'll go over what they are now. Relics are rewards you get at the end of each ruin. You can find them in chests as well, but they're quite rare. You can equip up to 4 at a time, and they give you some unique buffs that can range from stuff like a simple stat boost to a straight up new ability. The relics can be further upgraded by reaching the end of either ruin. There isn't a limit on how much you can upgrade these relics, which can lead to rather ridiculous outcomes. Regardless, this is where Ruin's strengths lie, as it gives you tons of options for your character build. Different players will gravitate towards different relics to suit their playstyle, which is awesome. You'd be surprised just how much you can find. True, some are just simple buffs that you might as well have equipped all the time, but my favourites are the ones that complement the combat of this game. My favourite being the Hooved Flesh, where each step you do does damage to whoever is close to you. It encourages you to move more, and the better you understand the enemies and their patterns, the more effective you can be with it. Not all relics are straight up buffs though. Some relics hold a compromise, offering a really good buff but at a cost. Some examples include the Black Tome, offering a hefty intelligence boost at the cost of your sanity and the brightness of your torches. The Big Head buff, I'm only calling it that because I can't remember its name, greatly increases your strength after every kill, but greatly harms you and destroys the relic upon taking any damage while the buff is active. Things like that really force you to consider how you build your character and greatly alter your gameplay in very meaningful ways. I can imagine some very complex and in-depth character builds in the future with this system, as well as brand new enemies to counter much of what these abilities, these relics offer. Right, so I went over quite a bit here, so let's just recap everything I went over. Combat is nice and simple, allowing for greater complexity if the player wants to further their skill. Enemies further complement the combat, though the game could do with more enemy types to allow the combat mechanics to shine and encourage more use of the combat abilities. Character build diversity is very strong, with many different weapons and mechanics in place to let people build their character as they please. Character design and the world setting is very interesting and immersive. There isn't much in terms of story and your main character's motivation, but I'm desperate to learn more about these aspects in the future. The crafting and building mechanics are a nice proof of concept, but are yet to have a further purpose other than to put a few items to good use. Further development of these two mechanics to fit with the core game would help. Ruins are fun to get through and get the point across, but could do with some more distinguishable features and surprises to keep repeat playthroughs engaging and further give each ruin a unique identity to one another. No doubt that this will be improved in the future. Relics are very fun and awesome for build variety and can be upgraded further to experiment with many different combinations. I'm hoping to see much more in the future. The unlimited upgrading of the relics that's in the game right now will probably eventually be tweaked in the future to stop that from being a possibility, but as long as it's balanced fine, that'll be okay. That just about does it. I've gone over just about everything I wanted to. There are a few other things I could have mentioned, but I really just wanted to focus on the things that would be helpful for the game going forward. I hope I did a good job. I'm really hopeful for this game and the future ahead of it, and I'm not just saying this to sound nice. I genuinely have high hopes that this game will develop into something special. And just to cover my own backside, I'm not an authority on this game. I'm not even a developer. I'm just a fan discussing the mechanics and design and making suggestions on what could be best for the game going forward. And for the record, if anything I suggested in this video does make it into the game, I don't want to take credit for any of it. For all any of us know, what I've mentioned in this video is something the sole developer Potku has been brewing in the background already. And look, please don't take any of my criticism as an attack or anything like that. Everything I mentioned is constructive and for the sake of the game. I, as well as everyone else, genuinely just wants this game to be the best it can be. Now, I suspect an update will happen very soon, and who knows, maybe the game will be nothing like what I envision in the future, and I'm okay with that. I'm not the game developer, I'm just a bloke that likes good video games. Thank you for watching. The video's done, but I figured since we're here, I'd bring up a quick update with what's going on. Why here? Well, if you've watched up to this far, it'll likely mean you're a fan of my content, which is awesome. Thank you for watching this video. I'll make this as brief as possible. Now, recently my viewership has been growing substantially the last couple of months, which has really caught me off guard. I've grown a good, 150 subscribers in the last, 3 months, which is, 3 times as what I made since I started this channel almost 2.5 years ago, which is more like 3 years ago, which is just unreal to me. Now, it might not seem like a big number, but remember, I'm new to all this, and to experience this big boost all of a sudden, it's so unreal. It's just so unreal to me. Now, judging by my YouTube analytics, I got a lot of my subscribers from my worst video. Literally, my number one worst, most terrible video on my channel. I couldn't tell you why that is, and I don't really know how to feel about that, nor what to actually do about it. All I can really do is thank you personally if that video is the reason you subscribe to me and that you genuinely enjoy the content I provide, even if it does take a long time to come out. But the fact that you've made it to the end of this video to listen to me say all this, I think proves that you do. So thank you very much. That's all really. My worst video is now my most popular video on my channel, and by a lot. And now I need to learn how to cope with that. Oh well, the numbers don't lie. Until next time.